But yeah, we're gonna go do the same thing as last week. We're gonna go through each champion one by one. We're gonna look at which legendaries I feel are good right now, which are I want to say which is best option in most cases, and then also if there's another one that works, then you can use that, and then maybe what build you would use with that. So for starters, Androxus. Honestly, Androxus is still the same. Like nothing's changed with him. Darkstalker is still the best option. If you want, you can experiment with both of these cards. Heads roll against like tank comp or easy headshots, so that's like Pip, Grok, Barrack, Ruckus, Makoa. All of those are pretty easy to headshot. Even a Drogoz actually. So if you want to experiment with a headshot card, that's sort of the comp you're looking to do it against. As for Godslayer, you can do that against a comp with very little mobility. So we're talking Ruckus, maybe Makoa. The hard thing with Makoa is I can hook your reversal, making it irrelevant. But basically anything with low mobility, so Tyras, Ruckuses, you know, that sort of deal. But besides that, in most cases, you're still going to want to run Darkstalker. And with Darkstalker, I can't say that word. Darkstalker, thank you. Then you want to run Abyss Walker 4, Sleight of Hand 3, Through the Warp 2, Buying Time 1, Seething Hatred 2. You don't have to run this exact build, you can do variations of it. I think Through the Warp 2 is the sweet spot for me at least. If you have Through the Warp 4, the dashes feel a bit laggy because you have to go a lot further. But Abyss Walker 4 is definitely the core of it, and then the ammo regen is also core. Besides that, you can flex it up however you want really, but this is just my preference. If you're running either of the two other builds, I would say just the old standard build with Power of the Abyss and Abyss Walker 4 is the way to go. That goes for either of the other two builds. You can mix it up a little bit, maybe take down 1 point in Abyss Walker and add 1 to Seething Hatred, or whatever you want to do, but I would say generally speaking this is kind of like the core build for Androxus if you're running any of the other cards. Alright, Barrack's seen a little bit of a buff to Architectonics with the latest patch. He got 3-second cooldown reduction on it. Tinkerin is still shit. Like there's no reason to pick it. It still has just like 10% more damage at all fall off ranges, so it's just not worth it at all. Fortify is still your general option. I would swap away from it if maybe you're against like a Torvald, or if you have multiple tanks on your team, then you can definitely run Architectonics. If you're running Fortify, I still like my main build. This one here. I still like my main build, just Healing Station 3, Forged Alloy 3, Foundation 3, and Palisade 2. You can mix it up a little bit depending on what your full comp is. If you have double healer like with a Grok and a Ying for instance, then you might take away Healing Station a little bit and add it to more Barricade. But this is just my general build. I would run this in most cases. If I'm going in blindly to a game, then I just pick this up. If you're running turrets, I'm gonna have to change this one up a bit. And take this away. Probably something like this. Maybe Healing Station 3, or maybe Forged Alloy 3 instead, so I can have another level in Field Deploy. But I would definitely say you should have Field Deploy at least at level 2. Healing Station still core. Another option would be, of course, to have Palisade instead of Foundation. Just depends on what you're playing against. If you're playing against a Drogoz, you want to block more Loogies, then Palisade's a bit better. If you're playing against a Ruckus, then maybe you want Foundation, so it lasts a bit longer to make sure. But if you're running turret builds, then something like this is probably the way to go. Bomb King still only has one card in my opinion. Like, you should have Accelerant in, again, like 95 to 99% of the cases. Demolition just isn't worth it. Like, it's still, even if you're trying to destroy shields, it doesn't even mean you're going to destroy shields, because it's not an instant detonation, it's not an instant kill on the shields, because it does sit there for a second. So I would say go with Accelerant in all cases. Chain Reaction's still bad, and with Accelerant, still the same build. It's a lot of personal preference. This is my build right now. Obviously, you don't have to have Jolt. You can swap that out, swap that in if you want or not. Up to you personally. I like King's New Cloak and Air Blast and Backdraft. King's Court can be a good option too if you want that. That, again, that's just personal preference. This is just my build. Alright, Buck still only has one card. You just have to have Bounce House. He's a bit worse now that he got nerfed, but he's still a decent pick. Well, I mean, you saw in the tier list, I put him a bit lower this time, but even then, even though this card got Nerfed, it's still just the best option, because neither of these two are particularly good. So Bounce House, it provides a bunch of mobility, you kind of have to have it. And with Bounce House, again, this is my default build. You can mix it up however you want, whether you want Leg Day or not. Seismic Wave is really only the one you have to have, but Leg Day you can lower or raise depending on what you want, and all these other cards are just personal preference. Cassie still, she's pretty reliant on big game. Exaction is still a decent option if we're talking about playing against more carries, less tanks. Against solo tank, maybe I'd run Exaction instead of big game, but if we're talking double tank, then you should probably still have big game. It's still a shit ton of burst even against squishies. So I'd say big game in most cases, Exaction if we're talking a lot of, you just want mobility, you just want to roll around and kill carries, then Exaction is an option. Same as before, this is my preference for the disengage build. You can go Sky Warden instead, so you have a full disengage build, but I definitely prefer having Incitement 4 and Somersault 2. If you want to go roll build, it's just the same as before. Before the legendaries came out, Incitement 4, and then Onslaught, and then personal preference. You can have lunge at different levels, you can have Somersault or not Somersault, that's up to you, whatever your personal preference is. But I would say, since you're going big game most of the time, I would get Territorial 4, Incitement 4, and then personal preference for these cards. Drogos, he has 3 options, but he has 2. He kind of has a straight up tier list. All 3 of these cards are pickable. It's just Wormjets is the best one and the most useful one. Fusilade's the second most useful one. You can use it in a decent amount of scenarios. And then Combustible is like very few scenarios you'd want to use this. Wormjets is like maybe like 60% of the time, 70% of the time, maybe a bit more you want to pick Wormjets up. It just provides the mobility you need to stay alive. Fusilade against tanks, against if you know you're not going to be able to outrun anybody, then you could just get Fusilade, but mostly it's just for tanks. Combustible is kind of just if you want wallhack, aka if you want to hit them with the Loogie and then have the dot damage appear through the wall. That's the only real reason to pick Combustible. You're just sacrificing so much if you pick this card. So Wormjets most of the time, Fusilade sometimes against like full tank. If you don't need the mobility, then Fusilade's a good option, and then Combustibles for very few scenarios, but it can be okay. If you like it, then you like it. As for loadouts, I'm still using the same ones. If I'm going direct hits, I have Masterful 3, Thrill of the Hunt 3, and Propel 3. If you're running Wormjets, I still run Masterful 3, just Propel 4. I don't have Thrill of the Hunt in this build, I just have Survival instead. And then Spitfire 2 in both of them. That's, again, this is kind of personal preference. You can replace this with whatever you want if you don't use the salvo as much. I don't use the salvo too much, but I think it's a decent card just to have in the background, you know? It always helps. Eevee's still just kind of bad in general. Her only real option is still Wormhole. Like, these cards are still just bad. Soar might have some potential, but not really. You still kind of just have to have Wormhole. With Wormhole, it's the same build as before. Teleport 4, Flicker 4, and then personal preference, I guess, on these. I go with Cold-Blooded to get the Ice Block cooldown down a bit, and then Biting Cold. I think Biting Cold is one of the best quality of life cards, that's for sure. It just gives you 1 ammo after you Ice Block, which can be pretty clutch sometimes. Fernando, he's honestly, I think Scorch might be as good as Aegis now. I was saying that Aegis is still better in most cases than Scorch, but he falls off much harder late game if you go Aegis. Aegis is definitely a good option for early game, but once they start getting wreckers and stuff, it's just like Torvald. Torvald is a really strong early game champ because they have no wreckers, and you can just stomp through it. So if you snowball really hard, then Aegis is a really good option. If you think you're not going to be able to snowball, or if you need some more late game, like if you have a Torvald already and a Fernando or something like that, then you might want to go to Scorch just to make sure you have some late game potential and don't get destroyed by Wrecker. So Scorch is a decent option, does do a lot of damage, and just having it on a lower cooldown is nice. Shield build, you can kind of do whatever. You can definitely run shield build and have this like old movement speed build, or you can go more like straight up shield build, like if you want. I don't know. It's not the best, but generally speaking, I would play this build with either of the two right now. I think. I mean, obviously I don't play much Fernando, but if I were to play Fernando, I'd probably play either of the two, either shield build or like shield card, Aegis, or Scorch, and I'd still play with this build regardless. But yeah, it kind of just depends on the rest of your comp, what you're playing against, which one you're going to go with. And I'd say either way, probably go with a build similar to this. And then a lot of this is just personal preference as well. Grok's still kind of the same. Maelstrom the best option. Wraith is still useless in my opinion. Maelstrom is the best. Totemic Ward has some potential, but not really. It's still just too easy to kill the totems. You have to have really good synergy if you're gonna like put your totems behind shields and stuff. So especially if we're talking casuals and ranked, I wouldn't say Totemic Ward is worth it at all. Just go with the Maelstrom. But there's some potential here for Totemic Ward if you're against a full CC comp maybe. But generally speaking, it's not as good. And with Maelstrom, just go all out. You can choose if you want Lightning Rod or not. Like if you see them go a lot of Cauterize, for instance, you might not want Lightning Rod. Instead, you could get Conduit, or you could get, I mean, honestly, you can get anything. You can get Gale if you want to. But I personally like Lightning Rod, especially in casuals and ranked. I feel like it's just like a nice bonus heal, basically. It gives you a lot of survivability, actually. So I personally play with Lightning Rod if they have a lot of Cauterize, and I see that before the game even starts. Like if they have a Pip and a Ying who are just immediately going into Cauterize, I might swap it out and go something more like this. Or, sorry, that's the wrong build. Something more like this, where I have Thunderstruck and Art Lightning, and then I just have more Ghost Walk oriented build. Grover still only has one card in my opinion. He can get away with some extra healing if you really want to play like a point stack comp, if you have a lot of shields and they can't commit to the Cauterize too much. But even then, Deep Roots is still just a better option because it allows you to get kills that otherwise you might miss. So I'd say go with Deep Roots in most cases. If you want to experiment, then go for it with the healing. You can definitely heal a lot. So, and with the Deep Roots, I'd say go Chop Down 4. Like Chop Down 4 and then personal preference all the way. I like having Vine Grasp and Heavenly Agility. And then besides that, it's just either cooldown on your Blossom, or movement speed, or damage reduction, whatever you choose, basically. However you feel like you're going to play it. If you want to go full heal build, then you just go all out, get the full cooldown reduction, get range on the heal, and get movement speed. You could potentially swap this out for damage reduction as well. That's just personal preference. Kinessa, still only one card in my opinion. Steady Aim has some potential, but like standing still as Kinessa is never really a good idea. So I'd say Eagle Eye in almost all scenarios. Suppression just isn't good enough right now. So Eagle Eye, and this is my personal build. Obviously, Kinessa has a lot of customizability in her build. You don't have to have Open Season. You can have Prodigy at like level 2 or level 3. Usually level 3 minimum, but you can get away with level 2. Quickscope 2, you can have no Quickscope at all, or you can have Quickscope 4. That's personal preference. Well stocked, again, also personal preference. You could replace this with Amplitude, for instance. I personally like having well stocked because I like having 3 mines out. So I'd say go with Eagle Eye, go with whatever build you want. Get the Prodigy at least. You could definitely have something like Beam Me Up instead if you want. That's just personal preference. Maeve is pretty useless right now, honestly. Like she got nerfed, so her heal that she had in her kit is now in this legendary card. But even though the heal is in the legendary card, you still kind of have to go elimination cooldown, or eliminations granting pounce cooldown. You can probably get away with using this. The problem is that you're not getting this card for anything other than the 500 heal, which is pretty rough. So honestly, Maeve's pretty bad right now. I'd say still go with the Rogue's Gambit and just use the default build. Try to heal as much as possible outside of your queue. Like get Savagery 4, Walk It Up 4. I feel like you're gonna have to have these two now if you're gonna play Maeve. Makoa, he has option for half shell, but honestly, like 90% of scenarios, or even more maybe, Pluck is still just the best option. You need the damage on the hook. Like you can't not have the damage on the hook because you're not going to get any kills then. You're not going to be able to provide the burst that you get with the hook then. And with that, you have two build options. You can either go strong on 4. You're going to have in every single deck, and then salvage 1 or 2, personal preference. Then it just comes down to you either have a higher level of Springtide or higher level of Barrier Reef. If they're getting a lot of Wreckers, you might want Barrier Reef. If they're getting a lot of Cauterize, or no, sorry, vice versa. If they're getting a lot of Cauterize, then you'll get Barrier Reef. If they have a lot of Wreckers, you'll get Springtide, so that you can actually get the heal from it. So you just replace this. Basically, you have this at level 2 or level 3, and you just swap these out depending on whatever you're playing against, basically. Snake definitely has 2 options now, I'd say. I still think the ult card isn't worth it at all. It's just a matter of what you have, what team comp you have, and what team comp you're playing against. If you choose the slow on your gourd, or if you choose the pocket healing. Like if you're pocket healing a solo Ruckus, then definitely you're gonna want the Spirits Chosen. But if we're talking again about playing against like a Barrack and a Torvald, then you might want the slow. This is very situational. It's just something, like honestly, when I get into game, I just look at the comps and I just go off my intuition. I go, okay, I'm gonna go with the slow card, or I'm gonna go with the pocket healing card. It's literally just straight up intuition. I just pick one. I just look at their comp as quick as I can to see, okay, gourd is better here, gourd slow is better here. So that's the way I do it. Like whatever I immediately feel is gonna work best, I just go with my gut instinct on that. But generally speaking, run the gourd slow against tanks. You can get a lot of ult charge if you just keep spamming them. If you're looking to, if they have a bunch of carries, then I'd probably say go with the pocket healing, because you're not going to be able to slow too many people anyways. Like if we're talking Drogos, Eevee, Maeve, Cassie, Andro, you're not going to get your slow off on them anyways. So just go with the pocket healing. But I definitely say gourd against like tanky comps or comps that don't have a lot of mobility outside of their just base movement speed. Then you can definitely go with the slow. Oh, and as for his build, still pretty much the same. I've been experimenting a little bit with having no damage reduction, and it's okay. If you're going with the gourd slow build, I'd get Eerie Presence 4 and Many Gourds 4. If you're playing against, or if you're playing with a low mobility tank comp, like if we're talking a Fernando or like a Makoa and a Ruckus, then you might not need Eerie Presence because you're going to be pocket healing them so much anyways. And they have such low mobility, it's hard to miss. Then you can drop Eerie Presence, and then it would be a build similar to this, Many Gourds and then Possession and Ritual Magic at higher levels. But I would say in most cases have a build sort of like this, especially if you're looking to heal carries. This way you get the cooldown reduction on Many Gourds. If you're going with straight up pocket healing, then this one's definitely an option. You don't really need the gourd cooldown as much, so you can get away with having more damage reduction and ritual magic too. Pip, I still think Pip has one pretty good option. Mega Potion might be an option, but it's something that's hard to test. Like Pip's not meant to be a healer anyways, so I'd say Catalyst is probably the way to go in most cases. With Catalyst, it's still the same old build: Side Tanks 4, Gift Giver 4, Smithereens 2, and then Sprint 1, Medicinal Excellence 1. These are a bit flexible. You don't have to have either of these two. It's just my personal preference. Oops, let's not skip Ruckus. Ruckus, I think more and more people are starting to rely on Flux Generator. Aerial Assault is still an option, especially on certain maps. It's just something you have to experiment with. You have to look at your comp, you have to look at the enemy comp, see, can I get away with having less damage reduction in order to have more mobility? It's personal preference, map dependent, and comp dependent, but in most cases you're going to be running Flux Generator. And with Flux Generator, this is my build at least, you can, Ruckus has a lot of options in his build. He doesn't have to have anything. Like you could easily have Opulence at a higher level. You just have to look at what kind of Wreckers and Cauterizes they have. So I'd say maybe set up 2 builds for this. One with Warden at a lower level maybe, or Refraction at a lower level, and then more healing if they have Wreckers. If they don't have Wreckers, then you can commit a bit more to the shield duration and the cooldown. But Metal March is definitely really solid. If you're not running the damage reduction card, you're instead running the dash card, then you can get Fuel Reserves 3 instead, just so that you have some extra mobility. It's worth it in my opinion. And these are literally the exact same build. It's just with level 3 Metal March or level 3 Fuel Reserves. Shaolin's still the same in my opinion. Definitely seeing some more potential in Desert Shadow. You can get away with it and be pretty stealthy, pretty sneaky sneaky stuns off with this build, so it's worth experimenting with. Recurve is still just the generally better option, but if we're talking about playing against a lot of flankers or needing to get sneaky angles on certain maps, then Desert Shadow is definitely an option. I use the same build for both. I was experimenting with a more withdraw heavy build, which does work. It has potential. If you want to run with a full withdraw build, then you can run something like this with Mirage 4 and run like the Wind 4. I still prefer using my normal deck with Wanderlust, Grounded, and Swagger 4. Sky still, again, in my opinion, only has one option. Debilitate might have some potential against tanks, but generally speaking, like the damage bonus you get from the poison bolts, you make up for by having preparation anyways, because it means you're right-clicking even more often. So I'd say preparation is still the best bet. Again, I still use my Victory Rush build. If I'm gonna play Sky, I still want to play with Victory Rush, but you can play. She has a lot of potential to pick different cards. You can customize this however you want. Like, you don't have to have Victory Rush at all if you don't want. You don't have to have Nimble Fingers even, although I would still recommend this is one of her better cards in my opinion. So you can mix it up. Like you can see here, I have really janky builds. Like you can have heal builds, you can have full smokescreen builds, whatever you really want here. Torvald still only has one option in my opinion. You have to have Field Study. There's some potential for the increased silence by 1 second. That's a 2.5 second silence, which can be pretty lethal. Like if you get a Makoa hook into this silence, it's pretty rough. But even so, like if you instead were to give 40% more damage to your Makoa on whoever he's hooking, it's still probably better than this anyways. So I'd say go Field Study in most cases. There's some personal preference. I've been using this build recently. Just more, you have to have Time Shaper 4 at like every single build you're making. You have to have Time Shaper 4 if you're gonna run Field Study. But besides that, you can do a lot of whatever you want really. Eldritch Speed is an option. This is what I like to use so I can catch up to people if I need to. And Conduction 3 just to make sure I have more survivability. What I would say is I don't recommend getting Wind Dancer. A lot of people like it because, I mean, it is nice with getting movement speed, but since the duration on it is so short, like 2 seconds, getting like 40% movement speed over 2 seconds can actually throw off your aim more than it helps. If you ever played Barrack with Accelerator Field, just go into practice range, get full Accelerator Field, and try to go through the barricade and still try to track your enemies. It makes it really hard. Like you just get thrown off by it. So I wouldn't recommend getting Wind Dancer in your build. It just, at least from my personal experience, it just throws off my aim more than it helps it. Like, sure, you're taking less damage because you're moving faster, but it's also harder to hit people because you're just getting a little boost for just 2 seconds. Tyra. I definitely think Tyra's making her entry into the scene in my opinion. She's really solid both in casuals and ranked. Even in competitive play, I think we might see her. Mercy Kill is still the best option in my opinion. Hunting Party is an option. It hasn't been tested too much, so it's hard to really say if it's good or not. Mercy Kill, it does a fuck ton of damage, so I'd recommend getting Mercy Kill in most scenarios. The lifesteal's just too inconsistent. Like the second they get it cauterized, this is just completely irrelevant anyways. So I wouldn't even bother getting First Blood. Just go with Mercy Kill in most cases. If you have a really high damage comp, then maybe you could go Hunting Party instead. Or if you have a lot of protection, then you could also go Hunting Party where you can just kind of stand on point and mark whoever's coming on the point over and over again. But Mercy Kill is definitely the better option. I still personally use this build. This is just straight up movement speed build. So you mark someone, you have lower cooldown on the mark, you mark someone, and then you just go crazy because you're so fast. So this is my personal favorite. You can mix it up a little bit. You could have higher level survivalist, or you could potentially have hunting season if they don't have at a higher level, that is, if they don't have a lot of cauterize. But you can definitely, I would definitely say get tracker 4, ranger 4. But if you want, you can switch it up. It's just personal preference here. Victor, I'd say gunnery is the best. Firefight has some potential. Cardio doesn't seem to be picked up very often. It doesn't seem great. If you're running away, then you're not in a situation. I mean, the only option I'd see is if you run away and then you turn and fight. But that doesn't really happen that often. Either you're spraying for free or you're getting chased way out of the fight. So I'd say get Gunnery in most cases. Maybe Firefight on smaller maps like Ice Mines, Jaguar Falls, but just the accuracy you get with right click it just makes you're still going to do more damage in most cases with Gunnery, even though you're technically getting more damage with Firefight. Just the precision you can have. So I'd say get Gunnery in most cases, and then you're probably going to want Grenadier. Grenadiers, it helps a lot with better players that like to shoulder peek a lot. You can really punish them for shoulder peeking instead of just going safe and healing. So Grenadier is definitely a better option than I was considering before. So I think go with Grenadier. You can't, if you really want to skip it, like if there's no reason to have it, then you could go with a flat jacket oriented build with firing stance. But if I were to play Victor right now, I'd probably play with Grenadier in most cases. Ying got nerfed. Her lifelike got nerfed quite a bit. Personally, I don't like lifelike. I've definitely seen Ying still playing with lifelike, and it is still a fine option. It's just not my personal preference. I like focusing lens personally, but resonance is an option as well. If you can practice with resonance and you can pull it off really well, then you can definitely use it. But I just like having full damage on the left clicks, especially when you're playing against tanks or low mobility champs. You can get so much damage using focusing lens. If you're playing against more high mobility champions or champions where you can't secure your left clicks, then you can use resonance instead. But if you're going to use resonance, I'd say try to not shatter unless you're in 1v1s. Like you don't need to shatter just because you can and get like more damage for it. I would say just use your illusions like normal, and then if someone kills your illusion and takes damage from it, that's kind of on them, right? It's just all you're doing is making your illusions a little bit more lethal, so it's harder to kill them. So I like focusing lens for the most part, but honestly either of these two options are perfectly fine too. I think either way with any of these options, I'm running this build right now, and I think this is my favorite build right now. It's just like having Mesmerism 2 is really core in my opinion, and then Squadron 4, Carry On 4 are both core. And then Rewind 1 you kind of have to have. Spring Forward you can swap out if you don't want it, but it's nice to have one more swap basically. So yeah, this is my build. For any of the builds really, I would still use this. The only option would be maybe switch out like Mesmerism for Pursuit, but not my favorite. Pursuit's the AI is so bad on the right click on the shatter anyways that I don't think it's worth it getting Pursuit. Just go with Mesmerism instead. And then last but not least, Inara. Inara has not been out for too long, so it's hard to say which of her cards are best. The Cripple it's not great. Like the problem with Inara is that she only has potential on like Ice Mines and Jaguar Falls, and that's it. Honestly, maybe not even Ice Mines. It could just be Jaguar Falls. And since we're talking Jaguar Falls, you're going to be up close, in which case the Cripple is okay. If I were to say any other map, then I would say the Cripple is probably bad because you're not going to be that close to anybody. But then again, you're only going to pick her on a close map anyways, so if you're doing that, the Cripple can be okay. The wall cooldown's also good. The only issue is that the wall itself is not that good. Like using the wall well consistently is really hard. So I don't know if Tremors is really that good because you're not going to get too much value from the walls anyways. Mother's Grace is nice. It's some extra damage reduction. It allows you to stay alive a bit longer. I'd probably say get the Cripple in most cases, especially if we're talking like Jaguar Falls, Ice Mines, where it can be so crucial, where everyone kind of sees everybody. But generally speaking, honestly, she doesn't have a lot of great options. Cripple or Mother's Grace are probably the options depending on what map you're on. And then as for loadouts, I literally only made one loadout, and I think this is just the loadout. I mean, it's hard to say because she's not really used that much, but this is just the loadout in my opinion. You don't really need anything else, so you might as well just get as much cooldown reduction as possible. Like get more damage reduction by having Earthen Guard on a lower cooldown, and then reduce the cooldown of your Cripple if you're running the Cripple. And it doesn't really matter which card you're running. Either way, I think this build is still the best because you're just getting cooldown on everything. So yeah, that's about it. That's everybody.